Ukraine's Air Force says Russia launched a record number of attack drones and missiles at the country overnight. Thousands of residents spent the night in shelters, including in subway stations or underground parking lots, as explosions and the sound of drones echoed through the city during the attack, which lasted 13 hours. Ukraine's military says Russia launched nearly 540 drones plus 11 ballistic and cruise missiles in the early hours of Friday. The mayor of Kyiv says at least 23 people were wounded. The massive attack came just hours after Ukraine's president said a U.S. company will produce hundreds of thousands of drones this year for the country. This comes as the Trump administration pauses some weapon shipments to Ukraine. President Trump earlier gave an update on his efforts to get a ceasefire in Ukraine.
I'm speaking to President Zelensky tomorrow, early in the morning, and I'm very disappointed with the conversation I had today with President Putin, because I don't think he's there. And I'm very disappointed. Well, it's not, I'm just saying, I don't think he's looking to stop. And that's too bad. This is Biden. This isn't me. This is Biden's war. It wouldn't have happened if I were president. It wouldn't have happened.
Those comments came after President Trump said on Thursday that he did not make any progress toward a ceasefire during his lengthy talk with Russian President Vladimir Putin. According to Russian state media, President Trump talked about ending the war in Ukraine as early as possible. The Kremlin quoted President Putin saying he would continue to try to solve what he called the, quote, root causes of Russia's so-called special military operation in Ukraine. More now on President Trump's call with Vladimir Putin from CNN's Kristen Holmes at the White House.
The White House did not provide any sort of readout of this call. However, President Trump, stopping to talk to reporters, said this.
We had a call. It was a pretty long call. We talked about a lot of things, including Iran. And we also talked about, as you know, the war with Ukraine. And I'm not happy about that.
Now, when pressed by a reporter if he had made any progress in terms of a Ukraine ceasefire, President Trump said they didn't make any progress at all. But again, no real readout from the White House or the president about what happened on this call. However, the Kremlin said that President Trump did bring up ending any kind of military action in Ukraine on Putin's part as soon as possible, which is something that Putin pushed back on, essentially saying that they would not be doing that, saying they were going to be sticking to their goals that addressed the root cause of the issues. The Kremlin clarifying that that meant that nothing was going to change in terms of their posture when it came to Ukraine. One thing that didn't come up on the call, we are told, is the fact that the United States had paused some shipments of munitions to Ukraine. That has been part of a notable shift that we have seen from the White House, from the Pentagon. However, White House officials said that this was part of a review that looked at all of military spending, looked at all of the aid that the United States provides to other foreign nations as part of where they are going for President Trump's agenda. But very interesting to see here, this call, much shorter than what we saw the first time around. And also President Trump, he is seemingly growing frustrated with his inability to solve the crisis in Ukraine. He said so as much that he had made, again, no progress in today's call. Kristen Holmes, CNN, the White House.
CNN's Matthew Chance has more now on what information we can glean from the call between Presidents Trump and Putin.
It's the sixth call that we know about that the two leaders have had. Nothing really substantial seems to have come out of it.
Russia releasing all of this, releasing the videos of the bombings and stuff. I'm not going to show you that. I'm not going to help Russia glorify their aggression, right? You can see them in the originals, but the reality is they are humiliating Trump because he was the one that said this shouldn't happen. He told Vladdy not to do it, and then, oh boy, he did it, right? So Trump looks like an absolute weak chump, right? But he also looks like a chump in particular because, remember, one of his consistent promises during the last election, he made all of them lies, right? Let's be clear. But one of the lies he told consistently was 24 hours Ukraine-Russia conflict over. 24 hours and it's done. I'll have it done, he said, even before I get in the office, like after elected, before in office, but 24 hours. So let's say January 22nd of this year, it should have been done. And that didn't happen because Trump's not the one in charge here. Putin's the one in charge here. And what's crazy, you're going to see this in the second half, that not only is the humiliation awful, there's a darker side to this.
When it comes to sanctions, the New York Times is reporting the US has imposed no new sanctions on Russia this year, unlike the previous administration, which imposed thousands of so-called maintenance sanctions targeting new schemes. Without continuous maintenance of restrictions, Russian workarounds actually can take hold. So in other words, over time, these sanctions become less effective, which seems to be the case here with Russia, which is why you need the new ones. So there does seem to be a picture emerging here that despite what the president may be saying publicly about not being happy with Russia, privately, he seems unwilling to apply any real pressure on Russia while working to weaken Ukraine's position.
You got it right. I mean, basically, he has not yet said he's going to tighten sanctions. And we don't know the answer to the $6 million question, which is when the $61 billion that Biden got out of Congress runs out, and it's going to run out this summer, is Trump going to go back to Congress and say, we need more money for Ukraine? If he doesn't, if he turns off the spigot, if there are no more U.S. weapons flowing to Ukraine, Ukraine is going to be in a very vulnerable position, and it makes it harder for Trump to get Putin to stop. And so I don't think Trump gets it yet. I think he came into office thinking that he could pick up the phone, call his bro, Mr. Putin, and tell Vladimir to stop. Well, it's not working. Now Trump needs to come around and understand that Trump will stop, that Putin will stop when he is stopped. And that means giving Ukraine what it needs to defend itself.
That makes it much easier for the Russians to overwhelm the Ukrainian air defenses. Basically, the game that the Russians are playing, Wolf, is we will overwhelm your air defenses. We will throw everything we've got at you as quickly as we possibly can. And that's how they get through the air defenses right now. You see the scenes we're seeing right now from Kyiv overnight. And that basic idea is to, in essence, force the Ukrainians into some kind of a settlement with them by overwhelming their defenses. And they do that not only through the drones and the missiles, but also through ground troops, which they're massing on various points along the front line.
Colonel Cedric Leighton, thanks very much for joining us.
Ukraine calls it one of the worst attacks since Russia's full-scale invasion more than 3 years ago. And it comes as the U.S. president engages in telephone diplomacy with the leaders of both countries, just hours after Donald Trump said he made no progress towards a ceasefire in a call with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Moscow unleashed a record number of missiles and drones on its neighbor. Authorities say the massive aerial bombardment on Kyiv killed one person and injured nearly 24 others. Hours after that deadly barrage, Trump spoke with Volodymyr Zelensky by phone in a conversation Ukraine's presidential office describes as very important and meaningful. Earlier, Zelensky expressed his frustration on social media and warned that without large-scale pressure, Russia will not change its, quote, dumb and destructive behavior. That comment coming just days after the Pentagon paused some weapons shipments to Ukraine. Nick Payton-Walsh joins us live now from London. So Zelensky obviously very frustrated by this. He's been trying to tell the U.S. that Putin simply cannot be trusted. Just walk us through the intensity of these overnight air raids in Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's clear from the readout we've received from President Zelensky's team in the past minutes that they've emerged from this phone call with President Trump, at least projecting a sense positivity here, sounding grateful is the phrase used for the support from the United States, calling it a very important and fruitful conversation, but also saying how President Trump is well informed and they spoke about the opportunities for air defense. Remember, the absence of Patriot missile interceptors, key to stopping Russian ballistic missiles, is something deeply troubling Ukraine at the moment. Trump himself, a matter of hours ago, hinted that indeed those supplies had stopped, as reports had suggested from his own Pentagon. Maybe something different is in the works. Certainly, Zelensky talks about meetings between their teams and the possibility of defense industrial capabilities and joint production. So maybe there's something changing the dynamic there. Very few specifics given by Zelensky in his readout, but certainly a tone of somebody who perhaps came away from that conversation with something indeed that they wanted. But that came, frankly, the attacks sandwiched by a phone call with Putin and Trump, and then a matter of hours after that call, which Trump described as very disappointing, we now have had what seems by Ukrainian figures to have been a record drone assault, mostly centered on the capital, Kiev. Some extraordinary images of the intensity of the anti-aircraft fire required. It does seem as though there was a slight change in feeling about many subjected to this, that perhaps Kiev's air defenses weren't doing quite such the admirable job they've been doing in past months or so, particularly with this higher toll and concerns as well, because Ukrainian intelligence assessments are now suggesting that perhaps Russia, that's risen from about 100 drones a night a year ago, is now able to put forward 500 or so, and may, they are concerned, be able to field 800 to 1,000 in the months ahead. But it's really the absence of the Patriots that leave people concerned. There are suggestions now that perhaps one person may have lost their life on the assault on Kiev.
That too did not go well.
I'm very disappointed with the conversation I had today with President Putin, because I don't think he's there. I don't think he's there. And I'm very disappointed. Well, it's not, I'm just saying, I don't think he's looking to stop. And that's too bad.
Among the smouldering remains of civilian worlds terrorized, Ukraine's foreign minister claimed fragments of a Goran 2 combat drone were found, made in China. The growing global footprint of a war where Kiev's daylight is darkened still by the smoke of the night before, and where the damage done is measured in intimate personal loss.
Now we're into, again, a key, possibly defining moment in this war. We don't know the details of the Trump-Zelensky call. Did they find a mechanism to continue supplying Patriots, which the US has said is deeply out of stock in terms of their own supplies? Going forwards, there have been suggestions perhaps that Germany might be able to step in and provide something along the lines of that, or at least engage in joint production too with the Ukrainians. That may be one way around this urgent, desperate shortage. Zelensky's been warning for months that Patriots are in very short supply, and indeed Russia has appeared.
We also have to realize here that yes, Trump is being humiliated, yes. But this is broadly Trump's doing. Trump is humiliated because of how this is playing out optically, but this is what Trump wanted. Trump wanted to let Russia win. At least that's what a lot of people are saying, right? Like, when people are like, he's going to get it done in 24 hours, well, the only way that would have happened is if he just lets Russia win, right? Like, that's how this would have happened. He would have, come in and said, give everything that he wants, and then the conflict is over, I guess, right? Like, you understand the rationale, right? Whether it's defensible or not. That's what would have happened. And so what you're seeing here is the reality of what Trump's created, which is that Russia feels emboldened by having a fellow authoritarian in the White House in the United States. This is what Donald Trump wanted. He just doesn't want it to look like it.